So, 3 years ago this week, there was a momentous occasion, a groundbreaking event that I think has lived in all of our memories ever since. And I think it's fair to say that it has changed society as a whole ever since. And of course, I'm talking about the release of this book, which is Star Wars: The Light of the Jedi, which is the first offering into a new era of Star Wars. And I remember sort of going back to 2018 and there being kind of all of these rumours about Project Luminous, wondering what it could be, and then finally finding out that it was going to be about a new era of the galaxy called the High Republic. And people were excited. There was a lot of potential. There was a lot of announcements about, novels and all these different tie-ins. And I'll be honest, I didn't jump in straight away. As you can probably tell, it's taken me 3 years to read the bloody thing. And if I'm being honest, I can't say exactly why it took me that long to start this journey into the High Republic. I think part of it, if I'm being really honest, is that I'm not always 100% comfortable with new things, especially in universes and franchises that I already have a relationship with. It's one thing to read something brand new altogether and immerse yourself in a brand new world, but in a world where you already are familiar, where you've got your kind of expectations set, there is, for me anyway, a little bit of wariness and a little bit of hesitancy to jump straight in. And I'd read almost everything that had been released in the novelization form since the Disney acquisition. I'd read a few Legends novels. There's still a few Legends novels I want to pick up, including Plagueis, which is, one that I plan to read in the coming months. And I'll probably do a review of that, so by all means, subscribe if you haven't, because there's going to be a lot more of this kind of thing, including a review of the next book in this series, which arrives tomorrow. I've ordered the next one, and that'll be here tomorrow. And if it's anywhere near as good as this one, I'll have read that in a few days, and so you can probably expect a review of that sometime in the next week. But I'd read all of the Disney, I hate calling it Disney, but the Disney era novels, whether it was the Aftermath trilogy, which I know, Chuck Wendig is not everyone's cup of tea. That trilogy certainly had some mixed opinions. I enjoyed it. I thought it added a lot of, context to the era of the sequel trilogies. It gave us a different look into some of the characters, and I just thought the stories were quite fun. Similarly, Lost Stars is my favourite novel that, I think certainly my favourite Star Wars novel that I've ever read. But it is definitely up there for any novel that I've read, full stop. Not that my list of novels having read is that extensive outside of Star Wars. But I've always had that immediate intrigue, like, oh, I like to read about Star Wars. I like to read the extra bits of context. But I think because this was not connected directly to anything that was already established, I was a little bit hesitant. And I kind of regret that now, because this is a fantastic book. The reason I wanted to pick it up now, other than it being on sale, is that, with the Acolyte coming later this year, I felt that it was about time I really got some background knowledge, so that I wasn't going into that show completely blind. And I've already, I've had some immersions into the High Republic, playing through Jedi Survivor. There's a tie-in there with the High Republic, though it focuses very much on a specific point and a specific character from that era. But mostly it was because I wanted to, get a bit of background knowledge before the Acolyte came out later this year. And, of course, one of the reasons that I regret not reading this sooner is because, it is something that I think I could have revelled in at the time with everyone else. I could have shared the experience. I know I'm getting to share it with you right now, but I think that when something brand new comes out, there's an excitement. There's the ability to sort of go and talk about it with other people at the time who are sharing that same excitement is great. One of the reasons that, I don't quite regret it is because, again, as mentioned, I don't have to wait for the next one to come along. I can just go and, read it straight away. But you should know just from the off that this took me about 3 days to read. Now, I am not the fastest reader in the world. I will admit that I sometimes struggle with, keeping my concentration. And so my reading sessions tend to go about an hour at most, because after an hour, I'm a little bit mentally fatigued and I start to struggle to retain information. So it should tell you a lot, the fact that I managed to finish this in 3 days. It's not the biggest novel in the world. It's only about 380 pages if you take out the kind of snippet for the next book, which I've intentionally not read those first 3 chapters for the next novel because I knew I was going to be reading it anyway. So I thought, well, I'll just jump into the whole thing once it arrives, rather than reading the snippet in this. But this is definitely an enjoyable read, and it's a different read from anything that I've, experienced, certainly within the Star Wars world. This book, it had a massive responsibility because this is the very first thing that anyone was going to read in this new era. So it has to catch your attention. It has to keep you interested. Because if you get halfway through this book and you're like, oh, this is boring, that could potentially sabotage the entire era for Disney. And I'm going to start saying Lucasfilm, because Lucasfilm is technically the company. And so this is a big responsibility for Charles Soule, who is the author. And he pulls no punches. He pulls no punches whatsoever. That first chapter, I had to go back and reread it to make sure that I was definitely, had the right book and I'd not skipped ahead, because it sets you up in this nice premise. Oh, this retired freighter captain, who's got this kind of idealistic way of doing things. She's very organized, kind of in the twilight of her life. And you think, oh, this is an interesting way to set up. This is going to be an interesting character to have, a perspective of as we get through this novel. Boom. No. It puts her immediately in danger. And you think, oh, she's going to get out of this. This object appears in hyperspace and she's avoided it. Oh, that was great. I wouldn't want to see her die straight away. She seems like an interesting character. Nope. Boom. Dead. Gone. Just like that. Along with a lot of the civilians that, you read about in the first novel, in the first chapter. And I'm like, okay, I'm in for a ride here, because they have just thrown me into the wolves straight away. They kind of gave me a couple of pages to settle in, and then they just smacked me in the face with death and destruction and tragedy. And, you kind of sit there and you think, okay, well, they obviously wants to set us up with an impactful beginning. But it's going to settle in now. We're going to start picking up on some of the, recurring characters. Nope. Second paragraph, exactly the same thing. You learn about this young guy who wants to ask, this young girl out on a date. And he's got all these dreams and prospects. And then immediately, boom, no, he's dead. Smashed into a million pieces from the same disaster that killed the character in the first chapter. So within the first couple of chapters, you're immediately like, oh my god, the gloves are off here before we've even had chance to put them on. And so I liked that concept. I like the idea of just immediately grabbing your attention by being like, hey, look, we're not gonna hold back here. No one is safe. We're just going to put you into this position of constantly wondering, is the end coming for any particular character around the corner? And that's what it does. It settles down a little bit as you start to read through, but there are moments in here where character death just comes out of the blue, and characters who you presume are going to be quite important. And I like the uncertainty of it. I enjoy that, because for me, plot armor, sort of ex machina escapes, they become tiresome very quickly. The idea that the perfect thing always comes along to save people or resolve a certain situation. Yes, it can feel really good. It can feel great when you have a character that you're really kind of rooting for, and it looks like they're in a hopeless situation. Those moments can be great, but when it happens all the time, you begin to lose faith and lose focus, because, it takes away from the real struggle of the situation. If you know that everyone's going to survive, there's no drama, there's no kind of tension, there's no gravitas to the story. And I think this is something that the Light of the Jedi does really well. It makes you feel nervous for all of the characters. Even at the very end of the book, I'm still uncertain whether, Loden Greatstorm is going to survive his, incarceration. And so that was something that set me off straight away. I was like, yeah, this is good. This is a good start. I like the fact it's gotten me excited, because now I'm like, what's going to happen next? And it just wants you to keep turning the pages. We then start to get introduced to, the Jedi and some of the main characters in the book. And, I won't lie, it is a bit daunting at first. There's a lot of people to be introduced. Not just the Jedi, there's the tertiary characters like Kevin Tarr, the Chancellor, the Republic characters. There's a lot of names to try and remember. And one thing that I appreciate is that they try and differentiate them as much as possible. Even if it's just down to kind of reminding you that they are different races. Whether it's a Twi'lek, whether it's a Nautolan, there's always kind of some kind of hint that, well, this is how you're going to remember this character, because they'll every so often just root back to a physical description. They might mention a tendril or, something along those lines. It just keeps that image in your mind of like, right, okay, that's that character. Even down to like the lightsaber blades, the colors of the blades. Sometimes that can be a big factor in, remembering who's who. And I think by the end of the book, I'd gotten a good grasp on characters and names. I mean, it helps that they killed a few of them off, because then you don't have to remember them. But at the same time, it is a bit daunting because there are a lot of characters. And it's understandable. It is the very first kind of look into this era. So there's no established characters outside of, Yoda, a couple of others. I'm trying to remember. Rancesis, I think, is it Otto Rancesis? I know Rancesis is his surname, and I remembered him from being name dropped in Jedi Survivor, and also the fact that he is the kind of big bearded council member with the snake-like. I think he's a snake species. So there's a few characters in there. Yariel Poof, who carry over into the original trilogy, because again, species live for different lengths of time. I'm very glad that they didn't have a very forced kind of like, here's Yoda. Do you remember Yoda? He's mentioned. And, he does make a bit of an appearance at the end. He doesn't have any kind of words to say, but, he appears on the Starlight Beacon. So, I'm glad that they didn't have to rely on that. It's kind of like, look, this is brand new. These are the new characters. You will get to know them eventually. And, the first thing they have them doing is what Jedi do best. Saving people. Again, it's not this slow kind of, we wake up with Avar Chris. And if I'm mispronouncing any of these names, I do apologise. Again, pronunciation is always going to be different. Like Nihil. Is it Nihil or Nihil? I think it's going to depend on where you're from. Because different countries pronounce things differently, even if we are all speaking English. And of course, it being a novel, it's all in your own head. So if I mispronounce anything, apologies. But, the very first thing that you get is the Jedi. Again, this is the era where they are most powerful, where they are most prominent. They have a large amount of numbers. The Republic is flourishing. And, the first thing you see them do is all of these heroics, saving people. And it immediately makes you root for them, because you're like, yes, I love this. And one of the things this book does that I really liked was give you an idea as to how everyone sees the Force differently. For Avar Chris, it's the song. And, her unique ability to be able to connect all of the Jedi, I really like that. Again, this idea that not every Force user is the same. They don't see the Force the same. They don't have the same abilities. They all have different personalities, sure. But that's what differentiates them. In the same way that I talked about how the appearances were constantly referred to try and remind you as to who the characters were, their perception of the Force is also something that I really enjoyed. Whether it's an ocean, whether it's just the Force itself, whether it's a song, I liked that idea. And people's different kind of takes on how the Force should be used is another unique thing. I think the original trilogy, the prequels, the sequels, they all did a good job at building up this idea of who the Jedi were, but it never really gave us a in-depth perspective on how all of the Jedi were different. You got to see how some of them were different in terms of personality in the prequels, but you never really got to see them at their height. Outside of the big battle on Geonosis, which really was just them all looking like they were just swinging their lightsabers around. You didn't get an insight. And, maybe the novelizations added something to that, but in terms of the visuals on screen, you just got the idea that these were all powerful Force users that were in battle, and that was it. And of course, the original trilogy, Luke is the only Jedi outside of Yoda and Obi-Wan. So you focus thoroughly on his perspective. And the same for the sequels, you focus on Rey's perspective. And so seeing so many different interpretations of the Force and how people use it, how people perceive it, what people think is the right step is very interesting. And again, the unique abilities are something that I really enjoy. And you can see why someone like Avar Kriss is so important and can be so decisive. You can be a fantastic swordsman, but if you've got the ability to communicate and connect every single Jedi on the battlefield, that's a very unique tool. And we saw that's the reason why they stopped the Hazel system disaster. And again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing anything there. But I thought that was a great way to introduce them all, and so that's pretty much the first part, the first act, if you will, is the disaster, trying to figure out what's just happened, being introduced to all the characters. It's very fast-paced, it's very urgent, it's very tense, and so it immediately grips you. And the second act, as you move into it, where things calm down a little bit, you start to get a bigger view of the galaxy, introduced to a few more characters, and the investigation begins. This something else that really kind of impressed me is the fact that it's expanding on knowledge of things outside of the Jedi. Hyperspace. Before, it was just perceived as being a way of traveling quickly, but no one really knew how, no one really asked that question. Here it gives you a bit more insight into not just hyperspace, but what other possibilities there are. And of course, the Ahsoka show did tap into this a little bit with its use of the space whales. I forget the name of them. The Pergil. And how they might use different methods to travel intergalactically. I think it still counts as intergalactic. But the expansion on just the base knowledge there opens up potentials, because you've got these hidden paths. It's like, well, are these things that still exist by the time of the original trilogy? Are these things that have maybe been forgotten to history that could be rediscovered going forward? Again, it opens up possibilities that, you kind of want to see play out in future content. And I'm sure that as I read through all of the other books, that will become apparent. Speaking of the paths, the Nihil as an antagonistic force are very interesting. And I will admit, not what I expected upon their initial introduction. The very first thing you see where they attack the four freighters, you think of them as some kind of a mystical force coming out of this big fog cloud, almost like an alien, foreign thing. It's different to anything you've seen before, so you think that maybe they will be this unknown alien species that has technology that's different to everyone else. And in a way, yes, they do have technology that differs, or at least an understanding of the galaxy that differs, that allows them to take advantage of, others. But they are just a group of people from the galaxy. They're just a group of raiders, really, when it comes down to it. Different species, different interests, different, personalities, as you can see from the different leaders of the Tempests. And I liked that structure, the way it was a storm. So you've got strikes, clouds, storms, tempests, runners. It's all connected to nature in a way. And I like the development over time of the Eye, Marchion Ro, who starts out as, you think, an opportunist character who is only in the position he's in because of his knowledge and his father. And there's definitely more history there than, as we kind of slowly pick through as the book progresses. There's more to him than leads on. You are kind of lulled into that same false sense of security that he is an opportunist, that he doesn't have a big plan. He's just kind of doing the best he can as things go along, but you learn as the book goes on that he actually had this whole thing planned from the beginning. He's smarter than you realise. He's got more history than you realise. As is mentioned, there's something that happened there with the Jedi. And this purple glowing device that he seems to infer that caused a great tragedy. I'm very interested in learning more about that. But he's also cruel. He's also, he fits in well with the Nihil, because one thing that we learn is that they are cruel. They are uncaring for anything other than their own gain. Throwing kids out of airlocks, is just one thing that they will do to meet their own goals. And so I liked the rawness of them. I liked the idea that, again, they don't really have loyalty to much other than their own tempests at the beginning. And there's a slow kind of build towards loyalty towards the eye by the end. It's still not solidified, but you can see where it's going. This is kind of being turned into a one-man operation rather than it being sort of three individual groups with individual interests trying to coexist. And, we use that against them, ultimately. And I loved the political play there. And that's something that, I think this book balances really well, is the politics of the different groups. But it doesn't overshadow, the main story itself and the kind of relationships between all the characters. And again, that's what this book really focuses on, is character relationships. You get all these little groups, throughout, whether it's Elzar Mann and Avar Kriss, who, I don't know about you, but when they were up on that tree at the very end and they were talking about, the sort of their own desires, Elzar's just been made a Jedi Master, Avar has been put in the position of power for the Starlight Beacon. I kind of just wanted them to be like, kiss, because there is a chemistry there. And I love Elzar's kind of unconventional methods. You can tell that he is someone that you would want to have around because he thinks outside the box. He's not someone that just blatantly accepts the standards of the Jedi. He's always looking for new ways for the light to evolve and adapt, and you need those kinds of people. And I feel like by the time that we reach the prequel era, those people have been slowly pushed aside, and it's very much about the status quo. And that's why the Jedi fell, because they'd become about the status quo rather than about expanding their knowledge and expanding their possibilities. Expansion is a big thing in this book. The Republic expanding into the Outer Rim, Jedi expanding their knowledge of the light, expanding the communications networks. It's all about that growth. And that's where you'd expect to start, at a point where you're very strong and you're wanting to grow that strength further and further through the galaxy. And the Republic itself does come across as very competent, very harmonious. I loved the positivity. I loved the kind of optimism, that everyone seems to permeate through. We are all the Republic. That's a great thing, for a galaxy that, let's face it, throughout every single era that we've seen, there has been some kind of despair. There's been something that has been a tragedy. There's always been that fight. That it always seems like our protagonists are the underdogs, or they are facing imminent disaster. And yes, there is imminent disaster here, but there is that undertone of optimism and, we can do this because we are at the height of our power and everything is going to be good. And, I think if I'd have read this era first and then moved on to the original trilogy, I'd probably be really depressed because I'd be like, my God, they had so much going for them and it all fell to shit. But it gives you kind of a retrospective idea of like, hey, things were really great. It's sad that it fell apart, but there's the possibility it could go back to being this way in the future. We've seen what can happen at the height of peace and prosperity. And that's what I really loved about this. And I hope it continues on throughout the next novels, this idea. And yes, there's going to be sort of turmoil. There's going to be, more tragedies. There's going to be eras of doubt. I'm sure that this isn't the last that we've seen of the Nihil. Certainly, I remember the Nihil attacking, what's the name of the planet that they were on in Jedi Survivor, that they built the temple on? I can't remember, but I remember the Nihil attacking, and that's why they had to retreat from it, and that caused all of the problems there in that story. And I just hope that we keep that undertone of hope and positivity until the moment comes that we really do transition into the current era. Again, I don't know how long the High Republic lasts for. I know that it's about 200 years before the original trilogy. So I'm hoping that this era does last for a while. I'm hoping that they milk it for all they can. Certainly in the Acolyte, I don't know exactly which part of the setting that's going to take place in, but I'm hoping that we get a similar thing. Whilst we get a look at the darker side of the Force and some of, the Sith elements, I'm hoping that it's also permeated with this kind of hopeful, successful republic, where everyone is prospering, That is something I really enjoyed about this book, because it makes you feel good. I think as Star Wars fans, we've had enough tragedy. We've had enough of the dark times for just now. We need some hope. We need some positivity, and I think this is what this High Republic era is about. And I think it's very clever to implement that in at this time, because it does give you something else to cling on to. It's something different, and I really like that. But going back to the pairings, obviously my favorite character in this is probably Loden and Bell. They're my favourite pairing for sure. But I think Loden, for me, is just such a uniquely humorous character who doesn't let his doubts get in the way of his positive kind of, perspective on things. He knows that his training could probably kill Bell if he didn't believe in Bell. And even then, he's probably still not sure. But I just love the fact that, again, he's a righteous character, but he's also not so serious. They make allusions to it in the book. That some of them think that some Jedi are too serious, that you've got to live life, It's not just about the Force and the light and things like that. You've got to be human, or at least whatever species you might be. In Loden's case, it's Twi'lek, But I do just love his positivity and obviously the sacrifices he makes, the fact that he was willing to do anything to save the Bairn family, I think, is it? The family, of farmers who he saves, except for the father who gets cut in two, which was, again, another moment where it's like, Jesus, okay, he's just dead. All that effort to try and save him, the perspective we got of him in the house, those poor kids and his wife gone, So far, those two are my favourite pairing. Loden is my favourite character, but again, I'm not hopeful for Loden's future, given where he ends up at the end of the book. Eivor Chris, again, I really love her perspective every time we get to see, her character and just how, important she is to the Jedi. It's a great thing. Again, Elzar Mann, really, really kind of appreciate his, kind of unique perspective and his unique personality. But there are so many good pairings in here, and some of them just finish. The Ithorian, whose partner is killed in battle just suddenly. Again, I'm forgetting names here, but the Jedi Master who was supposed to lead Starlight Beacon, just being killed in that final battle with Kesav. Kesav, I think his name was. It's just out of nowhere. It's just kind of like, oh, okay. They're just gone. They're very important characters, or at least they were building relationships with important characters, and they're just gone. And that's something I like. Again, that uncertainty is really cool. Starlight Beacon itself is an interesting prospect, and it reminds me of Starfleet Command 3. And if you've played that game, you'll know the parallel I'm about to draw. The Unity Station, which is a very similar concept. It's this big space station that is the culmination of many different species' efforts to build, not just a communications array, but a place where, people can go to. It's supposed to be an ideal of the future, of cooperation, of hope between many different worlds, and, to try and, bring in other worlds as well. And that station, unfortunately, suffers a terrible fate. It basically gets destroyed the moment it's completed, which, I kind of feel like that might happen here, given the fact that there's no Starlight Beacons in the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy, at least not that we know of. But I like the idea. I like the idea that it's a station where everything can happen. It's a Jedi temple, it's a communication array, it's got medical facilities, it's there for people to kind of get a view of what the galaxy is like in places they can't get to. It's a place to negotiate for warring sides. It's a place for ideals, it's a place for optimism, and again, it ties into that core theme of the whole era. It's about expansion, growth, pushing people further, uniting people. And I like that. I really do. The third kind of part of the book is that final conflict. It's the shortest part, but it is that kind of final culmination of the plans of the Nihil, and specifically the Eye. It's when you start to see the bigger picture that he's planned this all from the beginning. I knew that he was sending Kesav into a trap. I knew that he'd marked him for death, the moment that Kesav had considered, taking all those credits that he'd stolen from the Eridu system and kind of going off on his own. I knew at that moment he'd fucked up so much, there was no turning back. It was just, how is it going to happen and when is it going to happen? And as it turns out, it happened in a very unique way, where he took control of all of the engines, was jumping the ships to different points, essentially kamikazing them, and really just kind of screwing, that Tempest over. And, that's kind of perfect because it gives a demonstration as to what he's, willing to do to succeed. And the way he painted it into, Kesav was almost a hero, that was a very clever move because that then unites the remaining 2/3 of the Nihil under this new ideal. And it also makes it so that the 2 Tempest runners that are left really can't challenge him. One of them, she'd suffered defeat and, her Tempest was probably looking at her and thinking, not sure if you're the best person to lead. And the other Tempest runner, who didn't get as much of a focus, I just feel like maybe there's not much of a threat there, at least not in the eye of the Eye. But I loved everything about that. And the final act, kind of gives you slow down during that second act. There's a lot of investigation. There's a lot of kind of character moments. There's the building of that array. And then that final third, as short as it is, ramps everything back up to 100. And, you lose people, but you also get to learn new information. And there's so many different fronts. And I think what the story does really well is it ties many different stories and many different settings together, and it keeps you interested. There would be a very real possibility, especially with this being the first book in a new era, that you introduce too many characters, too many settings, and it happened in The Phantom Menace. The end of the film had 4 separate settings, all with main characters doing their own thing, and it kind of jumbles the film a bit, and it kind of throws you out. This doesn't do that. This keeps it all tied in nicely, well-paced. It keeps you invested in the characters. And, it kind of keeps things as simple as it can be, and there's little tidbits here and there for the future. The Santekas, the fact that they know that this Mari Santeca, has this unique ability to map out these paths. And it makes you wonder what happened to her, what's going to happen in the future with that, when she does eventually die. And obviously the Santekas being a name developed in the sequel trilogy with Lor Santeca. Again, it's a nice little tie-in to those future kind of characters. Also, you got to love the gays as well. But I just thought this was a fantastic novel, a fantastic first step into the world of the High Republic, and I'm very much looking forward to the next one. Like I say, I intentionally didn't read the sort of teaser chapters at the very end because I want to just jump straight in fresh for the next novel. And again, a very good chance I'll enjoy that. If I do, I'll continue to read them, continue to review them. So again, if you haven't, please do subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on that. But I thought this went about as well as it could have done. This is, again, one of my favourite reads. Kept me constantly engaged. I loved the diversity of the characters, not just diversity of race. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about diversity of personality, diversity of experience, diversity of, the way that they look at the Force, the way that they use the Force, the way that they are, kind of, their actions define who they are. But they've all got that common link. They're all Jedi. They're all doing everything they can, and they're not afraid to put down their lives at a moment's notice to help others. And that's a great message. I love that. And the thing is, that carries over to the Republic characters as well. You expect that of a Jedi, but you don't expect it from the members of the Republic, because we've learned that people become selfish, the Republic becomes corrupt and filled with internal politics. Here, it's not. It's pure. For the most part, it's pure. It's about helping others. It's about expanding the light, and I love that. I love that optimism. That's what this book gave me, was optimism. And yes, while I don't expect everything to carry on so brightly, I hope it carries on with that tone at the very least. That even through tragedy and through adversity, there is that belief that we are all the Republic, and that, you know, the light will succeed. And that's what I want. I think that's what we've been missing so dearly, not just from Star Wars, but from our general lives. And that's something that I think is desperately needed right now. We need this High Republic era. And perhaps it is really fitting that at a time where things almost, you know, became really bad, considering what happened the day after this book released 3 years ago, I think that it's very fitting it came out at that time, because, you know, it reminded us that, you know, there is still hope. It gave us a good feeling, and it gave me a good feeling at the very least. I hope it did you too. But yes, let me know, what did you think of this book? Has your opinion changed over the years? Obviously, don't spoil anything for me, because I'm still getting through all of these things. I don't quite know how much of the new the High Republic era I'm going to delve into. I definitely want to do the novels. I don't know about the young adult novels or the kids novels or any of the comics. I'll leave it to you guys to give me your feedback on whether you think that would be something I would enjoy. But I definitely want to do the adult novels, you know, get more background before the Acolyte comes out later this year. But yes, let me know what you thought of this book. How has your opinion changed of it over time? Did you enjoy it? Do you still enjoy it? Did you not like it, but now you like it? Where does it rank in terms of, you know, all of the novels that have come out? I've seen a lot of people say this is their favourite, which I understand. It that kind of makes me feel like, oh God, are there going to be some not so good novels coming out? But I mean, if this is the standard, then I can certainly say that yes, this is a very, very, very good book. But yes, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you for the next video.